Good. Great. Well, thanks everybody for being here today for our first BSUG of the year. A major thank you to Idaho Power, who is sponsoring this lecture series. Today, we get to have one of our very own, Kelsey Ramsey, present her research. But as this is our first meeting, wanted to welcome anybody that's not been participating in our BSUGs in the past. This is open to any and all. It's specifically designed to help those within the Idaho Power Service Territory to model and design buildings that really help promote energy efficiency. And one of the things that we've had to deal with for a while is COVID and the different mitigation strategies. So with Idaho Power, we did some research on different methods for providing that. And let me just manage my Zoom controls really quick and move this toolbar somewhere else so I can see the chat, but Dylan will be monitoring our chat. So a quick note on who we are. We are the University of Idaho Integrated Design Lab, and we're a research branch of the College of Art and Architecture. We've got a great team, and we are looking for another research scientist to join us this summer. So that position will be posted shortly. So if anybody on here is fancying a career change, would like to help with project management, explore new grants and things like that, talk to me, look on our website. We are really dedicated to education, outreach, and technical support. So we're not trying to compete with industry. We want to help you guys do your jobs even better. And maybe you're curious about something new or a modeling technique, but you don't have the time or personnel to invest in that particular technology right now. Well, let us graduate students and faculty explore that space with you and help educate your team and bring you up to an even higher performing level so that we get buildings that are efficient and also comfortable and function well. And one way we can do that is through our energy resource library. So it's about 900 tools that we've got at this point. If you're looking at doing an energy audit, anytime you have a question of how is my building performing, we've got the tools to kind of do a checkup on it. Once again, this is through the Idaho Power program. So if you are in Idaho Power Service Territory, if your firm is located here, or you're doing a project here, let us know. We can show you how to use these tools. You can look for envelope leaks, do some sub-metering, track plug loads, all those sorts of things, as well as monitor indoor air quality. A lot of CO2 monitors that we have are currently checked out, but we'll be getting those back in shortly and hopefully help people ventilate and run their buildings efficiently and well. BSUG, you're here already. We've got another lecture lined up for next month with Michael Wetter from the Center for Built Environment, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. So very excited to have him talk to us about district energy systems. We also have our technical design assistance program. So if you have a particular project that you'd like some additional energy analysis with, maybe you're looking at daylighting and skylight placement, and you're not sure how to do that. We won't do your job for you, but we will teach you and your team, how to use some of the tools that we've got here and other online tools to help you, or even tools like Revit or Insight 360 or Open Studio, Radiance. How can you place those skylights properly for not just this project, but projects moving on in the future? So a lot of it is free, which is great. Up to $4,000 worth of our time is completely free, which can make people suspicious sometimes. Once again, we're an educational institution, and this is sponsored through Idaho Power to help buildings become more efficient. If it's a very involved project, over $4,000 worth of our time, then there's a little bit of a cost share, and we can talk about that later. But at most, you'd be paying maybe $3,000 for that, because they kind of cap the program above $12,000 worth of work. So if you have a question, our number is on our website. Give us a call or send us an email, and we're happy to try and do some research and help you out. Because Idaho Power has, not just that program, but other energy efficiency opportunities for new construction, major renovation. Check out their website, idahopower.com/business. They've got their professional assistance incentive, which I believe was doubled last year. Shri or others, if you're online, other Idaho Power reps, let me know if this is still the case. And I see a chat coming up, so I'll look at that. Nope, that was something else. All right. So with that, I am excited to move on to our main presenter today, Kelsey Ramsey, talking about some of the research we did on virus mitigation strategies. What sort of energy impact do these different IAQ interventions actually have on our buildings? Kelsey's been with our lab for the last 2 years. She's graduating in 6 weeks. So I'm sure she's very excited. I am very sad to be losing her because she's been wonderful and outstanding student here, won the U of I Alumni Award for Excellence. She got her undergrad at University of Montana in Geosciences, so brings kind of a different flavor to the architecture world, and we've been so grateful to have her here. But like I said, she's graduating, and so if you are looking for an additional outstanding architect sometime later this summer, get in touch with Kelsey. But for now, Kelsey, this is your presentation, so I'll let you take it away. And Kelsey has said that she will field questions, right? So you can just unmute yourselves if you have a question. But...
All right. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Damon. My name's Kelsey, and I'm really excited to share some of the research that I've been doing the last year with you guys. It's been, like Damon said, with Idaho Power sponsored. We've been working about a year, sort of this culmination of literature reviews and energy models, and even a bit of interviewing local vendors and stuff like that. So there's a lot that went into this, and I'm excited to share with you guys. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. Happy to field those at any time. So without further ado, it's no surprise to any of you guys, because you signed up for this lecture probably, that that COVID is a big deal and indoor air quality is sort of a hot topic these days. For the first time, we're really giving attention to the air that we breathe, how much we breathe, where it goes, and also who we're sharing that air with. So indoor air quality is definitely a hot topic right now, and sort of where this presentation is going. Before I get into it too much, I just really love this article and I wanted to share it with you guys. It came out this fall from the Atlantic, and it just sort of talks about how in London in the 19th century, when they were putting their waste in the same place as their drinking water, there was tons of disease, cholera outbreaks everywhere, and everybody sort of just accepted it. Everybody in London at the time just accepted it as a way, something that you had to deal with, that we just have cholera outbreaks and we have this disease that we have to live with. And it wasn't until the Thames actually started to smell that people were like, oh, maybe that's where the disease was coming from. And so they decided to separate their drinking water and their sewage system. And then all of a sudden, all of these cholera outbreaks went away. So I think it's just, the article really is just bringing to light the fact that we have addressed these concerns with waterborne diseases and insect-borne diseases, malaria and stuff like that. But we haven't really touched on the respiratory yet. So it just sort of reframes it as, are our HVAC systems like a modern day sewage system? Are we gonna look back in 50 years or maybe even 10 and be grossed out that we've just kept all breathing the same air and recirculating that? And maybe things like coronavirus or the flu or the cold are more preventable than we thought, kind of like cholera in London in the 1900s or 19th century. So highly recommend reading this article. It's just really interesting. So that's part of the passion behind this is just indoor air quality and public health for me. So when the pandemic initially hit, ASHRAE, as I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, comes out with standards every 5 years, but the pandemic hit and everybody was looking at ASHRAE to give guidance and recommendations on, how do we start to tackle this illness as far as building readiness and HVAC and stuff like that. So they came up with the Epidemic Task Force so they could start getting guidance and recommendations out there quicker. And so if you haven't checked out this page, I highly suggest it. Tons of good information on there, and it's coming out every day. Probably next week there'll be new articles on there. So that's been a huge resource for me in this project, and highly suggest you look at it. So just a quick overview, what their core recommendations are, and again, maybe they'll change next week, but of course follow current regulatory guidelines. Ventilation, filtration, and air cleaning, they recommend a MERV 13 or higher, 3 air changes per hour of outdoor air or equivalent, maintaining temperature and humidity controls. Pretty basic stuff, and I'll go into it all more later, but really my point is that these recommendations are sort of baseline and also generalized. So really the efficacy of implementing things like a MERV 13 or a 3 air changes per hour of outdoor air, it really depends on the climate that you're in and the building type that you're in. As far as how feasible that is, what's the energy cost going to be of that, what's it going to do to my existing HVAC, and so all of these sort of nuances and discrepancies, they matter. So that's really where this this project lands is, okay, so there's all these recommendations out there right now on how do we improve our indoor air quality, but what does that mean for majority of buildings, specifically in the Treasure Valley? So that's what the energy model does for us. We start with these DOE commercial building prototypes, and we chose 8 out of, I believe there's 16 that are common in the Treasure Valley and in Boise. So each of these buildings has parameters associated with it, which I'll go into the energy model as far as how many stories are they, what is their HVAC system look like, what's their square footage, what's their occupancy, all of that stuff we take into account into the energy models, and it makes it, along with the weather files, a much richer conversation than these sort of baseline, you should use MERV, but where, when, stuff like that. So that's sort of the questions that we wanted to tackle. So we took these 8 building prototypes, and we sort of narrowed down 5 main indoor air quality strategies that we saw most commonly used, and there's 3 subcategories off of that. So we've got the particulate air filters, like your MERV filter that you all probably have in your home, HEPA filters, which are just a higher grade particulate air filter, UV disinfection, which has been around forever, but we're seeing sort of a new resurgence with the pandemic. Air ionization is a hot topic, and then also just increasing the outdoor air that our buildings take in. So 5 strategies, 3 subcategories, and then we sort of try these technologies, we simulate them in the model against those 8 commercial building prototypes. And here's just a quick overview. You'll see this this slide again, but just to give you an overview of sort of what came of that. We have our baseline model, which we just modeled as a MERV 6, so pretty low pressure drop. And then we simulated all the other technologies based on different discrepancies that I'll go into later. But really, a couple of the standout things as far as site EUI goes is that increasing outdoor air was really, had a really high energy peak toll, and that UVGI induct actually had the potential for energy savings. So I'll go into that more, why that is, but yeah, just a quick overview here. And the energy models give us a good idea of site EUI and the operating costs of implementing these technologies. And I'll note that also the operating costs, we took, Idaho power tariffs and Intermountain gas tariffs specifically for right now, and applied those to the increase in energy, so that we could get a more specific idea of exactly how much more it would cost this type of building to implement this technology. But it was also important to think about the capital costs, because our baseline model is assuming no technology in place yet, except for a MERV6, which is pretty basic MERV rated filter. So you'll see UVGI is obviously sticking out as a really high capital cost, which again we'll go into, but that there's, just to point out that there's quite a bit of a difference between the energy that you use and also the cost of actually implementing and maintaining that technology. So like I said earlier, each of these building types has a different HVAC system. And so this slide is really just to show you what kind of variation we got out of this. So the chart is the percentage increase in site EUI. And you'll notice that the y-axis is even different values. So these bar charts go have even greater variation in them. But yeah, let's get into, I want to get into the different technologies themselves. So that was just a quick overview about the research and sort of our findings, and then we'll get into that a little bit more, starting with our MERV filters, which stands for Medium Efficiency Reporting Value, something I can never remember these acronyms, but MERV filters are just those little pleated boxes that you slide in your air handling unit. You've probably done it at your home. We do it in commercial buildings as well. And as you go up in MERV rating, you go up in particle efficiency, or filtering efficiency, I should say. So COVID, even though the virus itself is a there's different numbers, but about a 0.1 to 0.5 microns in size. But the good news for us is that usually viruses aren't just floating around naked in the air, that they are actually sort of globbed onto respiratory droplets or different pieces of dust and pollen in the air. So that filter efficiency isn't quite as straightforward as maybe it sounds, but lucky for us, viruses glob onto other things more often, and we can filter those out. But I put this one in here. I really just love the graphic of it. You'll see down on the bottom left, the coronavirus really small, but just how much bigger, like a grain of pollen, a white blood cell, dust, all of that stuff that really the virus is usually sticking onto, and then we're able to filter it out from there. So going into the modeling a bit, this is just a couple screen grabs of the energy model that we did for MERV filters, for upgrading from a MERV6 filter to a MERV13, which ASHRAE recommends. And really the only thing that we needed to model for this one was the increase in pressure rise across that filter. So your fans have to work harder to push the air through the finer mesh of the MERV13 filter. And so from our research, pulled from a lot of different sources, basically we calculated that out to a 0.4 inches in water gauge pressure rise. So this was a pretty straightforward model. Plug that in, oops, And then here is sort of the breakdown of what that model came out to. So you'll see that capital costs are really low because basically you're already buying a MERV 6 filter. You just need to buy one that's a little bit more expensive. And then operating costs are the main cost associated with upgrading your MERV filter, just because with that fan, it's going to have to work a little bit harder to get it through that finer mesh, but the efficiency associated is much higher. I'm going to go back to real quick. Just right here, like you'll notice a MERV 5 is rated at a 32% efficiency, where MERV 13 has an 89% filter efficiency. So if your HVAC system can accommodate it, meaning your fans can push that air through there without being damaged and having to be replaced, then upgrading your MERV filter is a really simple, easy way to go. Virtually the maintenance is the same. You're gonna probably change it every 6 months or so according to the manufacturer guidelines. But yeah, maintenance is really easy. It's just that operating cost that sneaks up on you just a little bit on this one. But as far as other design guidelines go, right sizing your MERV filter is really important. So if you get a MERV filter that you've got an inch on each side, then all the air is just going to go right around that, and the filter is, doesn't really do much. So you want to make sure that you buy exactly the right filter size for your air handling unit, and even ASHRAE recommends taping it or using gasketing and just really sealing up those leaks to really get at that 89% efficiency. That the leaks are key. And also, again, just ensuring that your HVAC can accommodate the increased pressure drop or rise. I keep going wrong. So onto our second technology, which is also a particulate air filter, HEPA filters, high efficiency particulate air. There's two types of HEPA filters that you principally see. There's your portable ones that you just plug into the wall. They sit on the floor, maybe on a desk, and they sort of pull air in and filter it out. And then you've got your induct HEPA filters, which work like a MERV filter, but they're rated at much smaller particle size, submicron and nanoparticle size. So just basically a higher efficiency, 99% efficient at filtering those particles. So we'll go into real quick, just because we've seen a lot of those portable HEPA filters, in the lobbies of office buildings, or maybe you have one in your home, and then we all have a MERV filter. So I think it's just to lay out the pros and cons of those two commonly used technologies. The MERV filter is great because you probably already have one. It's just a matter of buying one with a higher efficiency. And the portable HEPA filters are also great because they do filter out those submicron and nanoparticles more than the MERV filters will, but they're a higher cost up front, capital cost, as well as the filters are just a little bit more, but they just allow you that flexibility to move the filter around where you need it, turn it on when you need it, and such. So if you have like a lobby with high occupancy, portable HEPA filters are really great to use in those high occupancy spaces. Also, wildfire smoke, which is something that we're starting to deal with more and more. If you can't bring in outdoor air, but there's obviously going to be some smoke getting in to your house, the HEPA filters are going to be able to filter out the really, really fine smoke much better than the MERV filters will. So as far as modeling HEPA filters goes, we modeled it just as a plug load. Some of the research we did sort of averaged out at 3.14 watts per person. So we put that plug load into the energy models. We put it in, I'm showing you here the medium office building prototype. just because it's a relatively straightforward HVAC configuration. But so we use the HEPA filter just in the main office space, and then we have it on all the time, 24/5, because just Monday through Friday. And yeah, so that was a pretty simple energy model as well. And then what that sort of came out to for us was, like I mentioned, sort of high capital costs, just because those to buy the portable filter can be pretty expensive. And then the filters, the HEPA filters within the portable unit can be expensive to replace, but operating costs are pretty low. So once you do that capital cost, the portable HEPA filters give you a lot of flexibility. You don't have to turn them on, and then you don't use any energy. So I like them for that reason. As far as design guidelines go for implementing a portable air filter, you just want to make sure that you go for the highest CADR, which stands for clean air delivery rate, that you can. And also to make sure that that filter is rated for your specific room size. So I put an example up here of an AHAM verified filter. That's what you're going to want to look for, is that little verification stamp. And it'll tell you want a high CADR, clean air delivery rate, but also for your room size. So it's not going to do you much good if you've got a big lecture hall and your filter is only rated for, an 8x8 room. So just a couple things to pay attention to. Also, placement is key. So you want to just put them in a place where there's good air mixing, so that you get lots of air going through that HEPA filter. And that means sort of avoiding corners a lot of the time, underneath windows. Yeah, I would just say when in doubt, put it in the middle of the room. But I know that can be kind of an eyesore. So, go for good air mixing. And then, like you'll see with all of these particulate air filters, you've got to change the filters regularly and according to manufacturer guidelines, because it's not going to do you much good if that thing is all clogged up and you're just not catching anything. The fans are working too hard. You're drawing too much energy. So definitely pay attention when you buy a new filter. When do you need to change it next? So in-duct HEPA filters, instead of your portable plug-and-play option, you can also have a HEPA filter, which just means, again, 99 or 98% efficiency, filter efficiency. You can put it in your duct, in your air handling unit, just like a MERV filter, but there's just going to be a much higher pressure drop associated with that. So if you remember the MERV filters, we modeled a pressure rise of 0.4 inches of water gauge. With the HEPA filters, our research indicated we had to up it to a 1.25 inches in water gauge. So quite a bit different. And that's why you're going to see a high maintenance cost, really, is because those filters are pretty expensive to replace. And you'll also need usually a pre-filter with them. But as far as capital costs, it's pretty standard just for your one filter that you start out, assuming that your HVAC system already has a HEPA filter in place. For in-duct HEPAs, it doesn't make a lot of sense to retrofit your HVAC to be able to accommodate, just because there is such a high pressure rise associated. Your fans have to work so hard to push air through that really fine folded mesh of the HEPA filter. So if your HVAC isn't rated for that, your fans are going to blow out, and you're just going to have to replace those and such. So Another reason that it would be hard to retrofit for an induct HEPA filter really is because of the leaks associated. You're just going to get that much more particulate getting on the sides, just like the MERV. It's going to go right past if you don't have it right sealed, meaning you want to tape or gasket or just make sure that the system is exactly sized for that HEPA filter. And again, just changing them. So moving on to UVGI. So ultraviolet germicidal irradiation has been around forever. They've used it with tuberculosis and malaria in schools, particularly like that upper room. It looks, it looks like just like one light hanging down, and it's sort of like Frankenstein-esque. But UVGI has gotten a lot of sort of new credit and new attention with the pandemic. So a lot of promise, I think. The two ways that you generally see it are an upper room UV system, which is, it sort of just looks like a cassette or a mini split, and they're usually mounted 7 to 8 feet off of the floor, and they just disinfect the air above where any human is, because at 254 nanometers wavelength, that's harmful to humans. So that's why we do it above where our heads are. But another way that we see UV in our buildings is to disinfect the cooling coils, where you're most likely to have mold spores and sort of gunk buildup right on those cooling coils. So you can use them in your air handling unit for that as well. To break down that nuance just a little bit more, because at least for me, I was like, oh my gosh, there's just so many different ways that UV is used. Like I said, it's either in your duct or in your room. If it's in your room, it's mounted on the wall above your head, or sometimes there's like portable lamps that you will see in operating rooms when it's not occupied, or stuff like that. But in duct, like I said, you can shine the UV light on your cooling coils and sort of disinfect the mold buildup there. But you also see it disinfecting the airstream itself. So each takes a different irradiance, and it takes a different speed or velocity of air going through that. So the key with UV, at least, I mean, in room and in duct, but particularly in duct, is just that it's installed right, because you do, if you're going to try and disinfect the airstream, then you have to make sure that you have a high irradiance and that air is coming into contact with the UV light for long enough for it to disinfect. And same with the surface disinfection, is sometimes you deal with changes in humidity and temperature within that air handling unit, and that can sort of affect the efficiency of those UV lamps. So great in theory and a lot of times in practice, but it does take a lot of monitoring and controls to install it right and maintain them right. So if you remember back to one of the first slides I showed you with all of the site EUIs for the different technologies, induct UVGI actually had a negative site EUI, which meant that we have a potential for energy savings, which is something we had read about, but all the research was done in Florida and really, I think Singapore as well, but really humid climates. So we were really curious to see how this sort of panned out for Boise, where it's very dry and we're a heating dominant climate, but it did show that there is potential for energy savings. And that is because the UV lights are, again, disinfecting the cooling coils and then just decreasing the pressure drop across the coils. So just like the MERVs, the fans don't have to work as hard to push all that air through. So with this one, we actually modeled a 20% drop in pressure, where like the MERV and the HEPA was a rise. So that is really what accounts for the energy savings. We also have to account, though, for the fact that the lamps are there and turned on, and basically are a plug load. So a small plug load associated with that, but ultimately the pressure drop meant that we had energy savings and not net positive. So here's all of that a little bit more in depth. Pretty low cost, especially compared to what you'll see with the in-room UVGI systems. Really, it's capital costs. You just got to buy the lamps and install them. But the maintenance is the big one here, because you have to be monitoring them so carefully and make sure that the lamps are running at an efficiency that it's actually disinfecting the air or disinfecting the coils. So maintenance associated with that is really the big one on this. But again, you don't have to clean your coils as much, so that's nice. So yeah, I sort of touched on this before, but really, I mean, the big thing here is just proper installation and proper management. So you just want to make sure that what's going on in there is doing what you designed it to do. As far as upper room UVGI, that was just a big plug load. We modeled it sort of as the same type of lamp, but the difference with the in-room is that you just need that much more. So instead of having, two little lamps pointed at your coils or within your ultra reflective air handling unit, it takes a lot more lamps to disinfect an entire room, the air. So higher energy costs, but the really big one with this one is the capital costs, because those lamps are so expensive. It just takes a lot to buy them and also to install them and install them correctly. So that's the big one with this. It's UVGI in room is very effective when installed right, but you have to think about reflective surfaces and lamp degradation over time, stuff like that. Great for uses in hospitals or operating rooms, places where you really do need to get things like almost completely disinfected, but just because of that high capital cost, that's why you don't see them very often in other situations. So design guidelines for the upper room. Like I said, it's got to be above your head because humans can't. It's damaging to our DNA as well as the virus's RNA. So you want to install them at least 7 feet above the ground, replace the lamps. From the research I did, it sounded like every 1 to 2 years, but of course that's going to depend on the manufacturer. And then a big one here is also just promoting air mixing. So you just want to make sure that the air is actually going up towards where the disinfectant light stream is. So needlepoint bipolar ionization. So this is like a emerging technology. It's gotten a lot of attention recently though, because the energy impact of it is so low. It's so low energy intensive, but again, an emerging technology. We wanted to study it. Basically, the way that it works is you ionize the air so that you've got all these positive and negative particles, and then the virus will kind of, because it's charged and other particulates in the air are also charged, they sort of clump onto each other. And that just makes it easier to filter out the virus. So in short, that's how it works if you're not familiar. Again, it's an emerging technology and it's got, the technology is very sound. The issue that we sort of ran into is that there's just not a lot of research right now on how applicable it is or how the efficacy of it with large volumes of air and fast moving air. So in a commercial HVAC, we know that in the technology in theory works. Does it work with HVAC? That is to be determined. But it's worth studying, I think, because the the energy impacts are so low. It's really just 1 watt per 5,300 CFM. So much lower than the UV. And what that comes out to, again, and when you look at the cost breakdown on the right, it's pretty low compared to a lot of the other ones. Really, it's capital costs. What it comes down to is, installing the technology, buying the technology and installing it. But operating costs are quite low, maintenance costs quite low. So there's this standard, the UL 2998 standard and certification. And so if you are going to go explore needlepoint bipolar ionization, you just want to make sure that it meets this standard, because there is a potential for ozone generation, which is also a lot of people's sort of reservations about this technology. It's, like I said, the efficacy with large and fast volumes of air is not well documented. And it's best installed in a place where there's ease of accessibility. So like rooftop units where you can access it a lot and sort of, make sure it's working. And but the big one is, again, that ozone generation. All in all, a lot of promise. Like you saw in the last slide, pretty low energy impacts, cost impacts once you get it installed. But we're just sort of waiting to see how it pans out with more studies coming out. On to our last technology, which is increasing outdoor air intake. This is sort of what we all did at the very beginning of the pandemic. We opened up our dampers, and it's a great temporary solution, not to mention all the other benefits that come with breathing outdoor air, like CO2 levels and stuff. But like you saw in the beginning, it did have a high energy impact. So ASHRAE recommends 3 air changes per hour, but that's going to depend on the use type. So like a hospital or a healthcare facility is generally, you want about 6 air change hours. And really what that comes down to is just sort of flushing out the stale air at a sufficient rate, so that we're not just breathing the same virus over and over again. But 3 air change per hour was sort of what I saw most often as the recommendation minimum. And so modeling that was relatively easy. We just opened up the dampers and upped our outdoor air intake to 3 air changes per hour. And that was almost no capital cost, well, 0 capital cost, because you don't have to do anything different. We can all just tell our HVAC system to take in more air. So it's all operating costs. We didn't include maintenance cost here, with the assumption that increasing your outdoor air intake, if it's not a non-DOAS, a non-dedicated outdoor air system, isn't really feasible. It's gonna be too hard for your HVAC to maintain temperature and humidity control. If it's taking in all of this really, really cold air, and then it's having to take all the humidity out and then rehumidify it. It's just a lot of wear and tear on your HVAC if it's not designed that way. So that's why we didn't include maintenance costs, because you wouldn't really increase your outdoor air long term if it was a non-DOAS system. But do know that if you had to, like we all did at the beginning of the pandemic when we were, what else do? We can't be breathing this nasty air. Then there is probably going to be some maintenance associated with that wear and tear. But really just high operating costs, just because it takes so much energy to condition the air and then make it suitable for your temperature and humidity set points. And then speaking of humidity and temperature set points, ASHRAE recommends maintaining a humidity between 40 and 60%. And that is mostly for particle deposition. Again, sort of like the ionization, globbing on and making it easier to filter out. And then a big one is maintaining a clean cooling coil. So that's usually going to be your weakest link in taking in more outdoor air, is that the heat transfer capability of that cooling coil goes down as it gets dirty. So it's important to keep that clean so that you can continue to condition and dehumidify and humidify the air. And then the last one there, the flush spaces for duration sufficient to reduce airborne particles by 95%. So that's what we're going for, is really flushing the room by 95%. And that's when the 3 to 6 air changes per hour is the best guess at what it would take to flush a space. But obviously it's going to depend on the space. And then, so back to this slide, just because I threw a lot of information at you between the last time you saw it. Again, we've got huge energy impacts with the outdoor air. You'll notice that IOA, I'm referring to the 3 air changes per hour that ASHRAE recommends, but we also were curious because some of the building types, like the large hotel and the full service restaurant, they were already at 3 air changes per hour. So it didn't really make a difference. So we thought, what if we up those to 100% outdoor air intake? And obviously, like the 3 air changes sort of skyrocketed. So great temporary solution, but hard to maintain, or at least expensive. Looking at the cost breakdown, again, the big offender here is that UVGI in room, just because of capital costs, equipment costs, installing all of those lights in place. But wrapping up here, really, what this is about is sort of building readiness and resiliency. So one technology isn't going to work all of the time. And so it's good to have sort of 2 that or more that could work when it's appropriate, basically. For example, a portable HEPA filter is great to have to plug in when occupancy is high or wildfire smoke is really bad. But then you also want to pair that with a higher MERV filter so that everything that's running through your HVAC is also being clean, and you sort of have a double action there. Another great pairing of technologies would be upgrading your MERV filter and implementing a needlepoint bipolar ionization. Because we don't know about the efficacy of needlepoint bipolar ionization, or there's not as much research, it's going to be harder to install that right. So upgrade your MERV and then hope that the needlepoint also does its job. Another great pairing, increasing the outdoor air intake, short term obviously, and also putting a UV light on your cooling coil so that cooling coil stays clean and you can increase the capability of heat transfer on the cooling coil. So just a couple ideas for you, but really what it's about is resiliency and designing for like what we used to call extreme conditions, and sort of we're going back on that a little bit. We're seeing extreme conditions more and more often. So when are they extreme, and when do we just need to start designing them at the minimum just maybe needs to change. So another part of this project was obviously the energy modeling and the research, and reaching out to local vendors and getting an idea of what sort of stuff is used around here to estimate those costs. But we also wanted to just sort of put this all into one place. So we came up with each technology. We made a different flyer for it, and it just sort of breaks down all of those numbers that I threw at you gives you some design guidelines, really simple, and sort of like a bottom line, as well as a lot of the resources that we use, which was a huge part of it was the literature review. So, feel free to hack those citations on the bottom. But I'm putting these up here because these are just 3 of 7 that we have that are going to be downloadable on our website, as well as we're going to post them in the chat. So I encourage you all to just go ahead, download those, use them. Feedback is welcome. And yeah, I guess that is all. Is there any questions? I haven't really been checking the chat. Oh, great. So yeah, so Dylan did put all of those flyers in the chat. So feel free to download them if you want to look over those numbers again, all those charts, everything is in there. And again, if you miss it, it's all on our website to download as well. So yeah, any questions? All right, well, looks like we're good.
Thinking about potential questions, I also did want to mention that we do have prizes to those that are in Idaho Power Service Territory. So some smart lighting features, including some new like LED Edison bulbs, which are fun. So yeah, so we've got 2 of those going out, and just a reminder that we'll have another presentation next month from Michael Wetter. But it sounded like somebody had unmuted and was ready to ask a question.
That was actually me. I just want to remind everyone that we do have a poll survey up. If you could please fill that out, we'll appreciate it. And to Zoe Kaufman, just scroll up in the chat. It should be a PDF file you could click to open and then download. If not, it will be available on our website under Design Tools.
I have a quick question. I'm wondering if Kelsey has any recommendations for indoor air quality monitoring systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think CO2 monitors are a great way they sort of indicate the amount of virus and bacteria and dust that can be in the air. So that's a good one. They can be a bit finicky, but I think they're worth it. And we have some at the Energy Resource Library to check out. Do you have any other?
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick comment that ASHRAE released a white paper just last week on CO2 monitors, and yeah, so it's a little bit nuanced there with their usage. That there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of how CO2 actually impacts health, but they can once again be interesting proxy sensors for ventilation. And in terms of particulate matter, for wildfire smoke and things like that, there's things like the Purple Air, and there are some other like IAQ Plus monitors. There's a fun podcast on continuous indoor air quality monitoring from the Building Science podcast, which talks about a company that's developing some of those. They are good at trending, the low cost ones, but not as good at a definitive number for some of those to actually quantify like a perfect PM 2.5, especially for wildfire smoke. So at the lab, I've been playing phone tag with Luke Montrose, he was actually on Boise State Public Radio yesterday. He's down at a conference today, all on indoor air quality monitoring. And based on his recommendations, we'll be getting a couple more tools for doing some of that. So.
Awesome, thank you. We are looking at air quality monitoring systems for our Boise and Seattle offices, and have been looking for kind of a holistic system. So yeah, any recommendations you have for that, but thank you. It's great.
Yeah, and the other one is, an ozone monitor if you
Right.
do have a needle point bipolar ionization device installed, because that can be a potential generation source.
Right. All right. Well, if there's not any more questions, thank you guys all for coming. Feel free to reach out via email if you have any questions on the research. There was a ton that went into it, and I just scratched the surface. So if you're interested, you want any resources, any data from us, I'm happy to talk. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and thank you guys.